Hey everybody, today I want to share my philosophy around capturing detail photos at weddings. So when I say detail photos, what I'm specifically referring to is capturing the ceremony space and the reception space, the spaces as they are ready before guests arrive. Love it or hate it, detail photos are an important part of a wedding, particularly if you are interested in shooting more luxury leaning weddings, more expensive weddings, weddings with bigger budgets, weddings where the couple has hired a designer to sort of design the day for them. If you think that it's not interesting to capture detail photos, I want to challenge you because I actually love capturing detail photos. It's one of my favorite parts of an event. The design of the wedding is sort of the culmination of many, many decisions that have been made by the couple and by their designer. They've also invested in their rentals and their florals and decor. It's really important to capture that for them so they remember what their guests experienced when they walked into those spaces. The way I think about it is that it's so interesting and exciting to me that an artist has spent months, maybe years, designing the spaces for these once-in-a-lifetime moments to take place and for memories to be made within them. Each wedding is designed for the couple, and so no wedding is alike. These events take place in these spaces that will never be recreated, and so it's important to be able to capture those fully. So when we come into these spaces, ceremony and reception, it can sometimes be overwhelming. The spaces are large, they're filled with intentional details. There are countless angles from which to photograph it, but what are the right ones? But I'm making this video to help. If I were to distill my sort of philosophy around capturing details into a single phrase, it would be wides, mediums, tights. When we think about perspective, I'm thinking specifically about guests. What are the guests experiencing when they walk into that space? If we think about capturing details with this sort of wide, medium, and tight philosophy, it helps us to create a well-rounded collection of images for those specific details. Okay, so to help you gain a better understanding of what I'm talking about, I'm going to take you into a photo gallery from a real wedding that I photographed a few months ago. By the way, PicTime is my gallery delivery service of choice. You can check them out using the link below. It's the best. But here's my gallery. So this is how I've organized it. So I've created separate sections for ceremony and cocktail hour details, as well as reception details. So we'll go ahead and start with ceremony and cocktail hour details. And so this particular wedding had this gorgeous cocktail hour setup with the escort table there in the center. And so I just want to walk you through these photos and sort of show you my process for taking them. Now, this is a mix of film and digital photos. The film was all scanned and processed by Richard Photolab, and the digital, I think, were primarily shot on my Sony A1. So let's look at this photo. This is a good example of what I would consider a wide shot. And now, obviously, the cocktail hour extends beyond this photograph. But for me, this is a successful wide shot because it's giving you an idea of the space in a really pleasing way, in my opinion. You know, if you were to capture this 24 millimeter horizontal, you might capture literally everything, but it might not be the most beautiful photograph. And so for me, I'm always balancing what's a beautiful photograph, but also wide enough to get the point across, right? So this is a good example of what a guest might experience when they're walking in. You still get the scope of the space, but it still maintains like structure and shape without just being like a grossly wide photo. I kind of structure this collection so that we start wide and get progressively tighter. So these become more like mid shots. I would call this one like a mid-wide shot where we have like a little bit more detail in the escort table, but we still see layers of tables. There's still like good depth here and tighter, just more like sort of medium shots. Then we have a tight of the flowers. And then we start specifically with the escort table. So this would be like a wide of the escort table. Then we get to like a mid of the escort table here. And then we get to tights of the escort table here. The thing to think about is, so like we have the space at large. What is the cocktail hour space? Okay, here it is, right? So this is a wide of the space, and then we have mids, and then we have tights, And then we have our escort table. So what's a wide of the escort table? The full table. And then we have mids and tights of the escort table as well. So like even within the cocktail hour setting, I'm thinking about the full space, and then I'm thinking about the escort table specifically. If we keep moving on, there's also some bar details here. So this is another example. So this is the other side of the space. So we have the full bar here, and then we have a medium here, and then we progressively get tighter and tighter. The other thing I wanted to mention about tight shots is I'm usually not going so tight that you lose perspective, right? So it might be easy to go really, really tight, like almost like macro on one of these matchboxes, but that's not really my style. It's something that you could do if you like that sort of thing. But for me, I like to keep the integrity of the design. So I don't often go so tight that I lose perspective of the detail in the design itself. This is a good example for me of the tightest that I would go for this to be a successful tight shot. Okay, so now we're going to move into ceremony. So in this case, I've started with a drone photo. Obviously, drone photos don't give the guest perspective, right? They're aerial photos, but I think that's the point of a drone photo, and that's why they work, is you get this perspective of the space that isn't available to the guests. I typically don't overdo it with drone. I like to be minimal on this, but in this case, I have sort of a drone photo of the full space, where you see everything, and then again, like a tighter shot of just the ceremony. And I kind of like these top-down photos of ceremony. They don't always work. Drone photos can be tricky. Just because it's a drone photo doesn't mean it's a good photo, so that's something to keep in mind. But I did like actually this top-down photo here. All right, so here we go. I really love this photo of ceremony. This for me is like a really successful kind of medium wide shot, right? So we have these beautiful floral designs here and the gorgeous chair rentals, and then this water tower is kind of like the signature like image from this venue, Maddie's Tavern in Los Olivos. And so I have this image that captures all of that. And so for me, this is like a really successful, it's not like a full wide, but it's like wide enough to give you a sense of the space. You sort of don't really know how big this ceremony space is completely. And then from there, I go to more of like a classic medium shot here. And this is an example of like a tight of the floral details here. So we go from wide to medium to tight. A couple more examples as we scroll through. This for me would be my wide shot of the space. Straight on, I think I was on a ladder, so I was a little bit higher. And as you can see, I'm cutting off the chairs at the end, which I think is okay, because again, if I were to photograph this with a really wide angle lens, it might not do the space justice. It might make it look a little bit too distorted or unflattering. So even though I've sort of cut off that last row of chairs, you still get an understanding of what the space is like, the scope of the space. You know, you see the floral details, they're not cut off. You see the huppah. You get a sense of this like gorgeous ceremony space. It feels like, you know, you could be a guest arriving before the ceremony. So for me, this is a really successful wide shot. And I have a few different versions of this. And then I progressively get tighter as we arrive at the huppah with the floral design, which was just like such an amazing one for this wedding. So again, in the same way that we thought about the escort table, now I'm thinking about the huppah. So this would be like a wide of the huppah. And this is like a medium of this one side of this floral installation. And then as we progress, we get tighter and tighter on these specific floral moments, so we can see all the details, because in a wide photo, you can't always digest it in an image, but these sort of medium tights help us understand these beautifully designed floral moments. And so I have several of these here. All right, so that's a good example of ceremony. Let's move into reception. So this reception space is one of my favorites from the year. It's absolutely stunning, but it was like very detailed. And so this is a space that I think it would be a little bit overwhelming to just dive into and start capturing. You know, in most cases, we don't have the luxury of time when it comes to photographing spaces. The catering team needs to start setting the table, pouring waters. The planning team has to light candles in a specific amount of time, and then guests inevitably have to enter the space and sit down. And we, in the midst of all this kind of chaos, have to capture beautiful detail photos that represent the space, that don't have like random candles that are not lit, or flatware that's not in line, or menus that have blown away, or things like this. So it can be a really challenging scenario for a photographer to capture photos. One thing that you can do to help yourself is walk into the space as it's getting set up, if you have time, and look at it with your eyes, meaning not through your camera, just with your naked eyes, not taking pictures, and finding how you want to photograph it. Like, what are the angles and the scenes and the moments within that space that are speaking to you, so that when you're ready to photograph the space, you kind of understand the lay of the land, as it were, and you can approach it in this more informed way rather than just showing up and kind of like spraying and praying and not really understanding the layout or the space or the angles. So give yourself the opportunity to study the space in advance. The other thing I would say is don't be afraid to ask the designer or the florist what their favorite moments are, because they often have a table setting or a floral design or installation that is their favorite, and they know exactly where it is shown off at its best. And so they will help you find those moments, and that helps save you time in finding them yourself. It's good to stay away from that, like, oh, I'm the photographer, nobody tell me what to do mindset, and think this is a collaboration. Think about how many people were involved in setting up this incredible space, and they're the ones that designed it. So they know the best angles and the best moments. So if it's a big, overwhelming space, use collaboration to help you get these photos. They want great results, you want great results, so why not work together? Okay, so let's talk about this space. So for this reception space, I felt like these sort of medium wides were the most successful photos. So this is a good example where we have, these 3 tables, and we see kind of layers of tables and florals and table settings with another iconic venue building in the back. From this angle, this is like a good wide medium photo, I think, that sort of gets this angle across. And this is actually the way that guests entered the space. So a good display of what this looked like when guests were entering, although maybe a little bit tighter than what I would want for like a full wide, but this is actually one of my favorite wide photos and one of the most successful. So then we sort of move into the space and see tighter photos. And now I sort of move around the space capturing different angles. Now, this is a photo that I would say is a medium wide that gives you a completely different feeling and perspective, right? Because it's basically, the subject is this single table in the center. You see the other tables on the sides, but it's not really clear how large the space is or what the scope of it is, but you get the sense of this like gorgeous table. You see the floral details, the chairs, the tablecloth, the place settings, and it's kind of this like nice perspective of, wow, like what a beautiful table for a dinner. And then we sort of move in again from there. Here's an example of like, I would say like a tighter shot of that same kind of perspective where the florals are now the subject rather than the table itself, but you get a sense of, oh, maybe this is what it felt like to like sit at this table. And these are sort of like my medium tights. This one's a little bit tighter where you just see the place setting and the florals. You don't get that chair in it. I think for like a traditional medium, it would be more like this, where you see a piece of the chairs, because remember, the chairs are still an important rental component that sort of ties the design together. So I like getting a sense of chairs. This is maybe tighter. This is a good, like, kind of more medium shot where we see the chair and we see more perspective on the design. So as we're going through here, I'm kind of focusing on different things. This is kind of like a more artistic shot of the place settings. I like finding angles that are interesting. This is a good example of where we see like the full scope of the table. Here's another like tighter shot. Here's another example of that. And then I sort of like move around the space, just capturing different moments and different angles. This is a good medium shot, like a classic, what I would consider medium of the table, where we have the chairs, the place settings, the florals. We see a little bit of the venue in the background. So this one is like probably for me the most successful medium from this collection of images. And then we kind of move into like tighter photos of the place settings where it's just kind of like the flatware and the dishes. And this one is one of my favorites. It just gives you a sense of what it felt like to sit down at the table. And you see these like gorgeous, gorgeous table settings here with the table number, the floral details, the plates and the flatware and the menu. And so you get this like full perspective. This is another one that's very similar to that, but vertical, that same kind of perspective of maybe like you're about to sit down at the table but you still see the chairs in the background. You see a little bit of the floral. I think it's okay to have pieces cut off as long as the photo feels balanced. So you can see like the bottom of the plate is a little cut off, the florals are cut off, but you get this balance between all of the elements that make up this design. And so for me, this is a really successful tight shot of this table setting. This is actually the kind of tight shot that I really like, even though it's not super tight, it's more like a medium tight, but I really like this kind of photo. Here's another example of a different subject, this like fruit and interesting like floral installation on the tables was so cool. And so this was like the detail to show off that. A tight shot that still shows perspective of the table. It's not just like a macro shot of the raspberries, but it's rather a shot where you see that, but you get that perspective of how were those presented within this design. And so for me, that's like a more successful tight shot than just like a macro shot of the fruit. Okay, and then I just want to show you one more, and this is like the tightest I would go. And I like this photo because it's very textural, and you get like a really nice tight shot of the place setting, the menu, flatware, plates. This is kind of like the opposite of a drone photo, where it's more of like almost macro of this specific section. And I feel like these kind of photos are not necessarily like my favorite photos, but I do like them because they're textural. And I think within the context of a collection of reception detail photos, this can be a really, really nice addition to kind of pull the whole thing together. And then in this case, I ended with drone photos. So I kind of like top-down drone photos where you see all the place settings. And again, going from, in this case, tight to medium, to wide, and then a full wide of the space like we had for ceremony. So anyway, I hope this video has been helpful for you. I hope you learned something. If you have questions, please leave them down below. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing. I'd love to see you in the next video. Thank you as always for watching, and I'll see you soon. Bye.